Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see some familiar faces as some community members, some of our PNW colleagues, and some people. I'm not sure who you are, but we're glad you're here. So we're really glad you're here today. The Leadership Institute is part of Purdue Northwest, and our focus is community facing. So we work on addressing community need around leadership development and innovation. So Society of Innovators and Leadership Institute are kind of sister organizations with PNW. So we're glad that our group today is a combination of community leaders and people from our PNW community. So with that, I'm going to make sure we honor your time. And Makisha is going to introduce our esteemed speaker. We're just so excited that Britt is with us today because she, if you haven't heard her, she's just a delightful and marvelous person. So we're really glad she's here. And thank you for making time for us today, Britt. Makisha, take it away.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sheila. Thanks, everybody, again, for joining us today. We, like Sheila said, we're very, very happy to have Britt here with us. I don't know Britt very well, but as a newcomer to PNW, she was one of the first warm faces that I saw. She was very welcoming. And I like to say that if PNW/Northwest Indiana Pride were a person, it would be Britt. So I'm going to give you just a brief introduction of her and her background. So she currently serves as the Assistant Dean of Students here at Purdue University Northwest. And again, she's a native and current resident of Gary, Indiana. Prior to serving here at PNW, she started her professional career in higher education as a housing professional, running the administrative and day-to-day management of university residence halls. Britt is a graduate of the University of Indianapolis, where she got a BS in computer information systems, and also Indiana State University, where she got a master's in student affairs and higher education. Two of her professional values are creating greater access to higher education for people in historically marginalized groups and leading with the lens of being vulnerable and authentic to self. She has established and created program initiatives to serve and retain students from historically marginalized and underrepresented, say that 3 times fast, underrepresented populations. Britt continues to look for opportunities to champion change and make PNW a more welcoming environment for students from all walks of life. I like to add that she does that for staff as well. And last but not least, and probably most important, she is the proud dog mom of a 10-year-old Yorkie and a 9-month-old pit bull. Without further ado, I introduce Ms. Britt Hudson.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that so much. My puppy is now 11 months and he's 80 pounds. He does not know that he's 80 pounds. He believes that he's a Yorkie. So he thinks he's a lap dog and he steps on my feet every day and doesn't realize he's the size of a grown man. But thank you so much for that. That was such a warm introduction and welcome. Thank you. I really appreciate that beyond belief. I was kind of tearing up during that because it's really nice to hear it from people. And I am not ever void of tears and expressing my emotions in any way when it comes to being in professional spaces. And that's a big part of why I wanted to talk about vulnerable leadership today. Is because I believe that, in a lot of opportunities that you have when you're in a work environment, we all have our goals, we all have our tasks and things that we're supposed to do, but we show up as whole humans when we walk into our offices and when we walk into our departments or anything like that. We show up that way. We can't cut things off when we walk in the door. It would seem like it would be a utopia if we were able to do those things and just cut it off and just work. And then once we leave work, we turn it back on and hop back in our personal life. But we're not always afforded that opportunity. And considering the work that I do on a regular basis, working with our students, I kind of have used that as a tool to be able to make sure that I am in a space where students are able to see me and know that I see them and trust me as a part of their journey through their collegiate experience. So it's very important to me, in being vulnerable, to my students, to my staff, to faculty that I work with, and anybody in the campus community. So that's a very, very huge deal. So that's why we're talking about vulnerable leadership today. And I'm going to start sharing my screen so you all can see my very gorgeous presentation. I will give a couple of different, I guess, disclaimers as a part of my presentation. I was raised by a family of what I call living room comedians. So my family is the funniest, some of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. And I was trained up under them. So I'm always going to have some jokes in here, and it's going to be awkward because we're in Zoom and you all are muted. So just, I hope my jokes land as well as I expect them to. I'll also mention that during this presentation, I will be doing, I have my slides, of course, there isn't a whole lot of content on those slides because I do want this to be more personal and more of a conversation to my friends that are on Zoom with us today. So I just want you to kind of be prepared for that as we dive into this. So of course, I'm talking about vulnerable leadership and some of the things that it taught me about myself. And in reality, those things that I have learned can be helpful to you in your leadership roles, in any walk of your life that you are a leader or considered a leader, be it at work, be it at home, be it in any of your community organizations, be it at church, whatever that might look like for you. I do believe that everyone has an opportunity to be a leader, even if you don't have a title. And that comes with being able to be present and be a whole person. And part of that is being vulnerable. So let's see here. Okay, so we've already gone through the introduction phase, so I won't necessarily do that again, but I will give a bit of a semi-shameless plug. As the Assistant Dean of Students, one of my tasks is to make sure that I spread the word of the Office of the Dean of Students at PNW and what we do to help support students. A big part of it is understanding that students come with a lot of layers and they come from all walks of life. And what we do in our office is very holistic. We try to attack the problem or the issue that the student has come to us with, but we also want to see the student for who they are and help them with anything that they might need to get help with in order for them to be successful. Of course, our main goal is to make sure students get to graduation. So we fight really hard to make sure that we help students through whatever processes, whatever university processes or procedures that they might need to understand or know so that they can get to that part. I'm starting off a presentation with a quote by one of the greatest orators, poets of all time, Beyonce. One thing that you will learn about me, if you have not already, I am a huge, very big levels of Beyonce fan. In my office here, I have one of Beyonce's albums in my office, like it's that deep. So I'm not saying that just for the sake of being cool for this presentation. I mean what I say. So one reason why I'm starting off with this quote, and I will read it, well, it's not necessarily a quote per se, it is a lyric from one of her songs. They love the way I walk because I walk with a vengeance, and they listen to me when I talk because I ain't pretending. It took a while, now I understand just where I'm going. I know the world and I know who I am. It's about time I show it. So I chose to start this off with that quote specifically, because in a means of being vulnerable and understanding how to be vulnerable in your leadership, of course, you know, there is lots of things that we still don't know about who we are or the world that we're in or the world that we live in. And we have to understand where we find our confidence at sometimes. And preparing for this presentation, when Makisha reached out to me about doing this, I was like, did she get the right email? Because I don't think she reached out to the right person. I'm still young in my leadership experience. I'm still young in my career. New, I guess I should say, in my career from my perspective. I don't have it all yet. Like, I'm not the person who should be doing this presentation. And then I put a pause on that negative self-talk and I said, if not you, then who? I have had an opportunity, and I'll talk about it a little bit more as I move forward. I just realized that it's a couple slides ahead. I've had an opportunity to have a lot of different experiences in my higher education career, and just in being a lifelong learner. My mom is a teacher, so I grew up in a world of being educated at all times, like to an extent of I had to do book reports in the summer. So that's the life that I grew up living. So in the sense of being able to go through like the trainings and do things to become a great leader, I've done that, but I've also been able to have a lot of really great experiences. And it was very much a realization for me that, yeah, I can talk about leadership. And I can talk about the things that I do that are personal to me, that help me in my journey and could possibly help somebody else. And that's sometimes what Beyonce does for me. She goes through these things and she talks about it on her albums, and it gives me a sense of empowerment. So I wanted to start that off this way because it just felt right. So some things that you will take away from our conversation today is you will learn a little bit about my leadership journey, what I got right and what I got wrong. And then also some reasons to consider putting a little vulnerability in your leadership. I understand that my personality and my views about vulnerability are, of course, different from everybody else's, but I want to give you a little bit of an option to consider being a little bit more vulnerable in the way that you decide to lead in whatever capacity that you do, and just how much more it can be helpful and beneficial, not only to your team, but of course to you, which then of course helps you enrich yourself and enrich your team moving forward. So I've already this has already happened. I might get a little teary. So don't make this awkward, okay? Because I won't make it awkward. I relish in my feels. They are visitors, but don't make this awkward, okay? I am very, very passionate about what I do and about working with the students that I work with. I fully believe that working in higher education is very much my purpose. And I am very much settled in that. And so sometimes I get so passionate and get so excited that it comes out in the form of tears. That's just how I emote sometimes. So just be prepared, but don't make it awkward. Okay. So these couple of pictures are some of the staffs that I've worked with and supervised over the past couple of years. This is not an extensive group of pictures, like I have so many more, but I just couldn't fit all of them into, it'll just be a slideshow of people. And that's not what you came here for. So I wanted to show this off as well to think about and put into perspective, not only for myself, but also in the scheme of this opportunity, that within the past 12 years of my professional career, I've probably trained and sent off about 150, maybe 175 leaders in the past 12 years, which when I thought about it was like, dang, that's pretty phenomenal. That's a lot of people. But that's important to me, one, because I do understand the beauty and the value of the ripple effect. And that's important to me when I talk about being vulnerable as a leader, because your vulnerability and the opportunities that you provide to open up and to be a genuine and honest person can provide so much more for your team. And then it role models that to them so that they're able to do that in other spaces outside of you. You've given them an opportunity to be able to try it out in a safe space. And then they continue to take that on outside of the space that you created based off of things that they have learned about themselves. And I've been able to do that for all of the students and the professional staff that I've worked with over the past couple of years, and been able to create that environment. And that space is very important for me because I want to make sure, as I mentioned before, and it was mentioned in my bio as well, that I create this access and inclusion for people of all walks of life to be able to feel comfortable within themselves. So these are my teams. These are some of the people that I've gotten an opportunity to work with. And with all of these groups, every single one of these groups, I've cried in front of, I have screamed or squealed in excitement in front of, I have shared a variety of different challenges that have happened in my life and my family, losing family members, gaining family members, gaining dogs, all of those things I've shared with all of these people. And a big part of why I can still call every single one of these people in these photos to this day is because of that relationship that I built with them and being vulnerable. So there's always opportunities to be able to do that and continue to create strong bonds. So in thinking about some of the things that I learned in my vulnerable leadership journey and things that I did right and I did wrong, was this navigation of trying to figure out, do I tell people my business? I grew up in a space, in a Black household, where you are told what happens in this house stays in this house. Nobody is supposed to know your business. And for a really long time in my leadership, I thought that was, it's a proverb, it's the gospel. So that's how I'm supposed to perform as a leader. But I wasn't getting anywhere with that, because my teams that I were working with, they didn't get to know me. They didn't know who I was. And a big part of that whole process for me was very much like, how is this team that I'm working with going to think I'm competent if I tell them too much about myself? If I tell them too much about everything that's going on, they're going to think like, oh, she's got so much going on at home. She's not able to take this on. She's not able to do this. She's not able to do that. I was nervous about that. And I thought that in that process, if I told anybody what was going on with me or how I was feeling, or if I were to properly emote, that I was going to be seen as a lesser competent leader. And that was completely not the case. I had opportunities where I figured out the appropriate things at times to share, because sometimes that's a big part of it, is knowing when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate. Thank God you all didn't get an opportunity to meet grad school Britt, because she was rough. She was figuring it out. But I figured those things out in a safe space because of the supervisors and the leaders that I had in grad school who allowed me that opportunity. One of those people who also allowed me the opportunity to come and work at PNW is Andy Petit. He was my supervisor in grad school, and he was really good at being able to model and show me what vulnerable leadership looked like. As he was continuing, it was his first professional position. So he was figuring that stuff out, and I was figuring things out with him, and being able to kind of understand from his perspective, how he navigated the world and how he was able to be vulnerable was very helpful in role modeling for me how I was going to be able to do that for myself. So thinking about, what things to share, how to share, what's appropriate to share. Of course, those things come in play with building relationships and understanding what type of relationship your team might want with you. There are going to be people, of course, who want to keep things completely and strictly professional. I am here to do a job, or I am here to perform a task. And beyond that, we don't need to do anything else. And that is 100% okay. But I show up into a space as my whole self. So I realize that I need to be able to tell my team that I'm working with what's going on, how things are happening for me, so that they're able to understand who I am and how I show up, but then also so that they don't possibly take anything personally. If I'm very excited about an initiative that we're doing in our office, I want everybody to be bought into that. If they're not into it just yet, we can have some more personal conversations about how do we get you there, but I want them to be in that with me. If they are wanting to understand a little bit more about me, I am an open book. I provide as much information to my team as they're willing to listen. But a big part of that and a big part of who I am is very much me being able to show up as my whole self to work. So in the process of showing up as your whole self and understanding how to be a vulnerable leader, One of the things that I learned a lot about in grad school is this concept of realistic self-appraisal. And what that essentially means, and I'm 100% paraphrasing, but I do have my theory book so I can look it up if we really need to get that deep into it, but we're only here for a couple more minutes, so I don't want to spoil the fun. But a big part about realistic self-appraisal is being able to essentially do an assessment of yourself and know where you are at that time. I try my best to do that every day before I walk into the office. Where am I at? Am I stressing because my younger brother did something dumb to my mom? Am I stressing because my dogs wouldn't go to the bathroom because it was pouring this morning and I'm worried about what my house is gonna look like when I get back? Am I just having a really tough day? Or did I wake up on the wrong side of the bed? Any of those things, I assess that before I walk into the office in the morning, because that is going to dictate how I move through my day. And that also is going to dictate my interactions with other people and especially my team. So as I'm doing that realistic self-appraisal, as I'm walking into the office, if I know I'm having an off day, I will let my team know I'm having an off day. Don't know what it is. I'm kind of in a funk, but I just want to let you know ahead of time because I want you to know that it is not personal. It has nothing to do with you. And my team knows and trusts in that because they know that I'm willing to be vulnerable with them. They also know that I'm a pretty honest person, so I'm not going to mince words. So if there's an issue, I'm going to address it. But it very much is helpful for everyone on my team to know, what are we getting ourselves into today? If I'm having an off morning and we get slammed with a bunch of students of concerns or a bunch of faculty issues or anything like that, I know coming into the day that I was having an off day. So all that extra stuff is going to kind of skew everything. So how do I work to make things a little bit more positive for myself and for my team? I would not be able to do any of that if I didn't appraise myself before I came into the office, if I didn't know where I was and checked in with my team as well to see where they're at, to know what's going on. So it's very important that you kind of do a check-in with yourself, do a check-in with your team to figure out how things are going, what are going on with them, so that you can know how you're moving through the day. Of course, with my staff, we have our one-on-ones once a week, but our communication is beyond just a one-on-one. So we have opportunities to kind of check in on what's happening outside of work, what's happening with family, what's happening with anything that might be possibly impacting them once they walk through that door, so that we are a tighter team, so we know what's going on. And that's important. I do that for myself. My team does that for themselves. And a big part of that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, is a big part of that is because I created that culture to be able to do that. And that's a big deal. One other thing that I learned in this process about my vulnerable leadership is understanding that my shared values can possibly drive your team. And understanding what your intentions are, what your thoughts are, what your values are, can help everyone be on the same page. With my team, they know and understand that I am very big with our students, that I want them to have a holistic experience. I want students to leave PNW having been properly trained in the classroom, but also have good interpersonal skills to be able to work with people outside of the classroom and have some good opportunities and some good experiences and understand how to be an adultier adult, because it's tough once you leave college. That bubble, once it breaks or you expand outside of it, it gets real rocky. But what we do while we're here is try to provide them a good, safe space to make some mistakes, to try some things, to do some things different. And because that is a very big value of mine, and my team also values that, it helps drive us more toward goals that we need to. I'm also big on education and access for historically marginalized populations. And so is my team. They all understand that, of course, for groups that are usually oppressed groups or historically underrepresented or historically marginalized groups, that they don't always get all of the things that their peers get to keep them on an even playing field. So my team understands that, and it understands that that's a value that they have and that's a value that I have. That helps drive us to be able to support our students on a whole different level than probably any other dean of students office in a 20,000 mile radius. We provide so much different types of opportunities and support for our students because we want to make sure that they're getting the access that they need to. So again, once they leave college, they're ready to go. And they're put kind of in that same space of being able to compete with their peers. That also includes inclusivity and belonging. When people come into my office, I want them to feel as though they belong here. Granted, our office is an office. It's not a house. If I could have the opportunity, my lobby of my office would look like somebody's grandma's living room, because I would just want them to be able to feel comfortable and settled when they come here to see us. It's already weird that they're coming to see this dean of students for whatever reason, but I want to make them feel as comfortable as possible. A big part of that is making sure that they feel like they are included and that they belong. So we do things in our office like make sure that we're addressing proper pronouns and we don't misgender people and we don't make assumptions about people or students because of their socioeconomic status or their ethnic backgrounds. But a big part of all of these things, of course, is I have been able to make it very clear to my staff that these are the values that I hold. They were able to make it very clear back to me that those are the values that they hold. And then that continues to push us forward and make us a lot more productive with our common goal in place. So that's a big thing that I've learned in that process. One other thing that I've learned about being vulnerable, which is really, really tough, is not being afraid to make decisions that some people might not like. Even Beyonce fired her own daddy. So it gets tough when you think about that, because of course, as humans, we want to be liked. I don't care what anybody says. Don't let anybody lie to you. Everybody wants to be liked. And in that process, when you want to be liked, you always consider when you are making decisions, when you're doing things, when you're having conversations of how people are going to receive you. A big part of being vulnerable, of course, is understanding that things might get rocky and things might get tough. As I mentioned earlier, with me possibly getting teary and like not making it awkward, because I won't make it awkward, I relish in being in awkward spaces. Just because it gives me an opportunity to grow, but also it gives me an opportunity to make people feel comfortable, and as much as I can, because we're already uncomfortable. So a big part of understanding, like when you're making decisions and doing things that of course won't be received well, and being vulnerable, is being transparent and saying flat out, you're not going to like this decision. You're not going to like what I have to tell you. You're not going to like, what is being kind of passed down to me. And I know that sucks. And I'm in it with you. I'm not going to, abandon ship for the sake of trying to save face, but being 100% honest and transparent. This is not going to be fun. We're not going to have a good time for the next couple months as we try to get through this thing, but we're in it together. And being able to express that. Of course, as mentioned here, Beyonce at one point was managed by her dad. She fired her dad. I'm sure Thanksgiving after that situation happened was the worst Thanksgiving for Beyonce, probably ever, because she had to sit across the table from her dad that she just fired. But that happens in leadership. You get into sticky situations where you have interactions with people, you tell them no, you give them information they don't want to hear. You have to be in those spaces sometimes. And it's 100% okay to say, yeah, this is real strange, y'all. So we're just gonna get through it as best as we can. And working through that through yourself, of course, as well, is very important. Again, touching base with you, knowing that you're going to be sitting in a space where you might not be on the best of terms with some people, or you may have said something that kind of pissed somebody off a couple of weeks ago, and you felt it just as much as they felt it, and you're going to have to address it at some point. But a big part of that is understanding, knowing where you're at, being honest, being transparent, and being able to kind of get through that process. There's always going to be sunshine on the other end of that storm. Like there's always going to be a rainbow. So you have to just get through the storm. And the storm sucks. Like nobody is like, oh, I can't wait for it to storm unless your grass is like super dry. But you don't usually ask for those things, right? You want the rainbows. We want it to be as hot and beautiful and sunny as it is right now, all the time, but that's not real. So we have to get through those tough spots. And a big part of that is being able to be vulnerable and being able to be intentional with how you're feeling and what's going on at the time. So one thing to think about, and that I've realized in this process as well, is having the courage to be vulnerable pays off. And pays off can sometimes include a dollar sign. When you're vulnerable and have an opportunity to be vulnerable with the teams that you're working with, you establish trust. When people can trust you, they are bought into whatever you're selling. Be that a new initiative that you're working on, leadership change that's happening, some shifts in some procedures, any of those things that could be coming up. When you're vulnerable and you provide them with as much information as you can, when you're being honest, when you're being transparent, your team trusts you. And they know that the decisions that you're making, or the decisions that you're leading, that you are not going to lead them astray, and that you are going to be in the trenches with them just as much as, if you were one of their peers. That then leads to better output. When you're thinking about, of course, any type of business, or even in this situation with higher education, when you have those things, the output, of course, is what we want, right? We want to be able to have some form of deliverables. We want to be able to say that we've cleaned off our to-do list. We want to be able to say that we've met with whatever clients that we needed to, and we secured the bag, whatever that might look like. A lot of that output has to come with the vulnerability and the trust. If your team doesn't trust you or doesn't believe in the direction that you're going in, your output is going to be impacted. So that is very big to think about, is how do you create that environment where you are vulnerable, that your team trusts you, and that they're able to trust that you are leading them in the direction that they need to go in. That will increase their output. So thinking about all of those things and what can you do in this process? So I've talked a little bit about it through this whole journey, but of course, like the bigger thing is creating the culture. You want to create an opportunity or a space for people to be able to be vulnerable, for you to be able to be vulnerable. That comes with building genuine connections. That comes, of course, with, like I said, that genuine component. We're not doing it just to check off the checklist that we're being vulnerable today. That is not what we're doing here. And that is never what I'm telling anybody to do. It needs to be genuine. It needs to come from the heart. It needs to come from a place of you really honestly, truly mean it. And you honestly, truly mean what you're saying, what you're doing, and you're bought into it yourself. So you want to make that kind of the framework there, and you want to build those genuine connections and genuine relationships in order to be able to do that. You want to express your intentions. You want them to understand, of course, that you're not being vulnerable just for the sake of like telling them your business or using them as any type of therapy supplement, anything like that. That is definitely not the case at all. You want them to understand who you are, and you want them to know who you are as a leader, and be able to identify that as you are making decisions or as you are leading the team moving forward, that they are able to trust you, and that this is some of the framework that you have in making the decisions that you have moving along. As they trust you, of course, the output continues to increase. You want to work intentionally to not be consistently negative. One thing that I will say, and some people might feel some kind of ways about this, but I do not believe in genuine connections based off of like an entire process of you just being mad and nasty about things. In a lot of cultures and a lot of communities, you can build relationships on the fact that you might hate somewhere that you work. It's not genuine. It's not, because in reality, once that hate can be taken away, that relationship or friendship can fall apart. So in that, you want to work to intentionally be not be constantly negative. You want to be vulnerable. You want to keep your team abreast of what's going on or what changes are happening. But you want to make sure that you're being, in that honesty, you want to make sure that you are not being negative and talking down about the decisions that are being made or the organization that you work for. Because in reality, if you keep doing that, and if you feel that way, honestly and truly, then you don't trust the place that you're working at. So then you can't move that mission forward. How is your team going to trust you? It just kind of creates this like unnecessary toxic environment. So you want to be intentional about making sure that you're not being consistently negative. You want to think about how your vulnerability or how your negative maybe things or things that you might say could possibly impact your team. Because again, they're walking in as whole people as well. So if you are walking in and you're being negative about things that are going on, you're like, well, I'm just going to be transparent with you and tell you all this trash that's happening. But they are still processing all their things. They might have had someone in their family that has passed away recently. They might be dealing with some financial issues. They might be dealing with issues with their kids. You know, any of those things that could be happening. You want to be very intentional and cognizant of what you're doing. We don't want to create any type of trauma bonds. So we want to make sure that we are being intentional about not being negative. And then, of course, you want to show your team that you appreciate them and their willingness to be on this journey with you. And, you know, in reality, of course, because of us coming out of a shutdown, we're kind of still in a pandemic, but out of a shutdown, I'll say, you know, that has impacted a lot of our budgets and things that we're able to do. So we're not necessarily able to show people how much we appreciate them by raises or bonuses or anything like that, which of course everybody would love, but we're not able to do that all the time. Sometimes it is as simple as you telling them, thank you, because I wouldn't be able to do it without you. Or I just want you to know and understand that if you weren't there in that 1 second, I would have broke down. So I appreciate you for showing up. Anything like that and being genuine about it, because you can tell someone thank you and it be meaningless. You want to have intention and be purposeful in thanking and appreciating your team, but especially that if they're willing to keep on this journey with you, it's important. My 2 staff members that work with me, we've been through some things over the past 3 years. We've been through some leadership changes. We've been through some policy changes, some procedure changes. And even with myself, sometimes I make a decision on Monday and on Wednesday, I changed my mind. We're going to do something different because it's not been working in those 2 days. But they're willing to go on that journey with me. And a big part of that is that they trust what I'm doing. And I thank them as many times as I possibly can where it still sounds genuine. It is genuine to them for going on that journey with me, because they 100% could have been like, you know what, I'm out. But they've stuck with it. And that's really important. So you want to make sure that you show your team that you appreciate them, and being able for them to just keep on it with you and not giving up on you just yet. So that is the completion of my thoughts. But I know that there are comments. I've not really been paying attention to the chat, but I see the little bubble. There are questions, comments, concerns, maybe, possibly cries of joy or outrage. I'm not 100% sure. All are possible, but I want to go ahead and open up the floor. So thank you all for listening to me.
Sheila, you're muted.
Thank you. You did a marvelous job, Britt. Thank you so much. First of all, your slides, we all want whatever the template is, the flowers is just so uplifting and joyful. As a plant lover, I just kept like, oh, what's the next one going to look like? So beautiful. So thank you for that. There are a couple of really interesting questions. So Mr. Akanbi had a really good, and I think probably he's not the only one on the call that might have this same concern. So some of us have had bad experiences working in toxic environments, working for difficult people, people who bring lots of bad juju with them. They aren't a happy human, and they sometimes take that out on the team. So in that situation, his point is really well taken. You know, how do you handle vulnerability at work when it hasn't been a good experience? He gave an example that, you know, being taken advantage of because of your vulnerability. And so that makes one dread being vulnerable again. And how do you recover from that environment? Or even if you're still in that environment, how do you change your response, your ability to handle that so that you stay healthy and are still able to be the full person? You know, further on his messages, you know, he knows he would be a better leader if he was able to, you know, get back to that again. And so I'm sure he's one of many of us who've said, you know, that hurt. And it's when you're vulnerable like that, you open yourself up to being, you know, a target or whatever. How do you make sure to, you know, you stay the course and get back to your vulnerable self and your authentic leadership?
Yeah. So thank you for that question. And it's being vulnerable. It's hard. It's hard. I've been in spaces where I initially went in guarded and then of course let my guard down and got burnt. And then you want to realize like, oh, well, you know, I don't want this to change who I am. If this is genuinely how you are, I don't want this to change who I am, but I have to protect myself. It's tough. And one way that I have gone about doing that is very much, you know, being cognizant of what I choose to share and what I choose to be vulnerable with. Like I'm never telling anyone to walk into a space on day one, giving them the full story. Because that can be very risky, obviously. But I would also 100% say, you know, finding your pockets of trust. I call my group that I've worked with previously, that is my pocket of trust. And I mentioned that we all work together. So it wasn't just like people who were outside of the organization who didn't know anything about the organization at all. I call them my tribal council. Like they're the people that I consult and the people that I run things through or just say like, can you believe this happened? I need to let this out. Finding those pockets where you do feel safe, where you do feel comfortable is important. So if you're able to do that, do that. But if you're not able to do that and you're kind of trying to navigate how do you show up as your whole self and or be vulnerable, knowing that you've been burnt or bouncing back from being burnt, there can be this mentality very much of survival. And when you're in survival mode, it's really not fight or flight, it's just fight. And one thing to kind of keep in mind with that is, for yourself, not even for anybody else, not even for the organization. And I know what was mentioned was like, you know, I would be a better leader if I was able to be more vulnerable. So do it for you then. Just do it for you. And find pockets of ways to be your authentic and vulnerable self just for you, so that you can show up as whole as you can and be able to produce whatever your output is supposed to be. If that is how your environment is, if that's the things that are in your office, your Beyonce album, if that is, you know, things that you have from home that make you feel a little bit more safe or make you feel more comfortable, whatever that might be, then do that. But then I would highly encourage, in a way, dissecting the incident and what happened and seeing if that is that one person's concern or issue, or if there's a culture concern or issue. If you're in a space to be able to change that culture, then I would say 100% go for it. If it's just one person and you're obviously not in a space to possibly change that person because they could just be a negative Nancy, then you distance yourself in a way of being able to get the things that you need to get done, but not letting them affect your opportunity to be vulnerable and show up as your whole self. You want to, I say in the sense of something like this, you don't want to survive, you want to thrive. So a big part of that is finding out how do you get to that space of being able to go back to thriving instead of surviving. I don't know if that answered anything, but that's just my thoughts.
I think that was really perfect. I think when people are vulnerable and then they get hurt when they're in a vulnerable place, they blame it on the vulnerability and the fact that they were open, rather than the fact that it's actually somebody chose to do that. And you still have to remain true to yourself. So I appreciated your answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any questions? Jeff looks like he has a question. If you could select single instances, what do you feel would be, whoops, it just jumped up on me. What would you feel would be the worst and the best experience with students? That's a great question.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think your joy shows through. And so, all experiences with students obviously aren't joyful, although there are many. But, our students come to us with, sometimes in very challenging times. So I think he's trying to capture kind of your vulnerability with students.
Yeah, I do very much live in the world of like the 80-20 rule. Like 80% is always going to be great and 20% is probably going to be trash, but I need the 80% to outshine the 20%. And that's what happens with students for sure. Like there's definitely 20% that have been terrible, that I really wish that I could like call their parents or guardians or whoever raised them and say, what did you do and why? But on the whole, I have had 80% of students who have just been fantastic and phenomenal. And I don't let the 20% dictate that 80. I would probably say, as far as worst experiences with students, and it's not necessarily that they were like doing anything bad or mean or wrong. In one of the worst years I've had professionally, I unfortunately had to watch 3 18-year-olds in different settings taken away from a residence hall in a body bag. And because of that experience, everything else is joyful because it's never that bad. Oh, excuse me. So that's here I am tearing up. I love what I do and I love the students that I work with, and college is hard for them. Like it's hard. I went through college, it was hard. And to have to go through things like that, like losing classmates, losing, roommates, losing floor mates, best friends, it's really, really tough. So when you have that perspective of knowing how bad it can get, everything else is fine. Like everything else is fine. If we are getting them to graduation and getting them to being whole people, or even if they're not getting it to graduation, but they're, finding out what they want to do, or they're figuring it out. Maybe they're taking a break from college because it's too expensive to figure it out here. Whatever that might look like for them, it makes everything so much more easy to deal with. But the big things as far as like best experiences definitely have been when my students have reached out to me on Facebook or email or phone calls and told me like, I clearly didn't know what you were saying then, but I get it now. And thank you for just trying with me, because I know I was rough. That makes it worth it. And you don't get it all the time, and it doesn't come every single day. I wish I had a Harry Potter mailbox of letters from all the students that I've worked with or helped that just are flying in that they love me so much. That's not real. But I know what I'm doing and I know the impact that I'm having on my students, and it makes it worth it. Excuse me.
Thank you, Britt. We appreciate your vulnerability. A lot of the comments in the chat are just people thanking you for being real and for sharing. It's interesting that we all have so many shared experiences and shared feelings, but often we don't connect with each other on those feelings of not being sure of ourselves, or being afraid, or being uncomfortable, or not being really sure that we're following the right pathway. So we have a question that how would you handle being the only vulnerable leader on a project when the student or the main goal that is supposed to be your goal is not the priority? So maybe a few words of guidance as to how do you help a team shift where vulnerability, authenticity, being focused on what's really, critically important. How do you help as a leader? How do you use your skills to help a group shift?
Yeah. So one of those things is definitely, as I mentioned before, like expressing your intention and letting them know kind of upfront what the expectation is as far as the goal or the deliverable that you're trying to accomplish, but also letting them know or understand what the culture that you're creating or wanting to create is going to be. Like, yes, we have this enormous project that we're working on, but we're going to have fun during this process. Like, I'm not just going to be crunching away at numbers this whole time. I'm not just going to be doing this research this whole time. I'm going to be making jokes. I'm going to bring you snacks. I'm going to like doing all of those things, and expressing how you're going to be in that space is important. And a big part of that is role modeling that behavior, right? Like being able to create that culture is them seeing you doing it, not just saying it, like you're walking the walk. And then they feel a little bit more comfortable to do it themselves. Then they're able to show up to work, to that team meeting or anything like that in a better place or space than they were before, knowing that they are seeing you be able to do that as well. But it really has to come, I think, of course, with like that shared goal or that shared expectation or shared value, and knowing that this is at the root of what we're doing. At the root of what we're doing right now is getting this thing done. At the root of what we're doing is making sure that our students are successful. At the root of what we're doing is making sure that our students feel seen or feel heard. As long as we know that this is our common goal, how we get there is, could be predicted by a couple different things: our expectations for our project, our expectations from our administration, whatever that might be. But we can still enjoy ourselves in that process. And then that helps us have a better experience. So at the end of the day, when we have this, we can kind of like rejoice that we did the thing that we were supposed to do, and we had fun along the way. And it didn't seem as painful as it could have been the whole time.
We could all have that joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of joy along the way. So Rachel is our academic director, and she's, I see her nodding and smiling a lot, and she always has some brilliant nuggets of wisdom. So Rachel, I would love to hear what you're thinking right now.
It's hard to follow Britt. But I will say, Britt, you did spark a few things for me that have made me really think about some of my own views about vulnerability. And I actually love Nicole's question, because I think I would echo what you said. Vulnerability is hard, right? Leadership is hard, and vulnerable leadership is particularly difficult. And one of the things that I really am taking away from your presentation today, I loved what you opened up with, to have us get a bit of an understanding of the context in which you grew up. The Black proverb was really insightful for me. What it sparked for me was a question around vulnerability as a privilege. And it really made me wonder about cultures where, the norm is to get to know each other by sharing a lot of personal information, and that I'm kind of curious, does that sometimes create a situation that the culture is not as inclusive as it could be, because it's not as sensitive to the fact that maybe being vulnerable at that level or that type of information is not safe for people and is not sensitive to what they are willing to share. And so this is actually a puzzle in my mind, and I don't know if you have an answer to that. But I will say your comments about learning when to share, what's appropriate to share, and how to share it was also really helpful for me. And I'm going to guess probably to a lot of people as well, because it is a bit of a dance. So I don't know if you want to comment on just kind of my random reflections based on what I'm learning from you.
Yeah. So there's layers. So, and I probably should have prefaced this a little bit more in my presentation, but I mean, it's pretty obvious. I'm a Black woman. So the way that I approach and see the world and my experiences, especially in higher education, are very much framed that way. That is my lens. I fully believe, especially I've seen it happen, but then also in my research and my graduate program, of course, your lens and how you show up are definitely based on your salient identities. So the identities that you think about on a regular basis when you're describing yourself. When I do that, that is definitely Black woman. So when I come into spaces and think about my level of vulnerability, of course, I have to be cognizant of me showing up as a Black woman first, and what that looks like and how that level of vulnerability works for me. Of course, there are times and places and people that I would feel more comfortable being vulnerable with, and I'm able and willing to let my guard down just a little bit, just off top, just by being in that space with them. And then there are some folks that I'm like, nope, we're gonna raise that bar a little higher. So I think, it's a big part of understanding, I guess, in the sense of like culture and inclusion, and what levels of vulnerability. A lot of those things are very much tied up in identity. When some students sit in my office and I'm asking them to tell me what's going on and help me help them, they can be very closed off. And a lot of that has to do with identity. And I know that and I understand that. So then it's my job for me to be able, again, to role model this level of vulnerability and this level of opportunity for trust. I guess I would say it like that, because it's the reality of it is I can't make people trust me off top. I can't make people instantly trust me, but I want to provide them the opportunity to be able to have me be a trusting person in their life, for them to be able to give me that information and tell me whatever. So I know that and I understand that as a part of vulnerability and how you move forward. But I think, yes, in thinking about that, how do we create opportunities of trust or opportunities for trust in that vulnerable sense? I'm a Black woman, but I'm also a Midwesterner, and we love to share a story. We love to share a life story and a life background. So, all those things kind of play in part into it. But then, of course, like creating opportunities for trust, creating opportunities for people to feel comfortable and feel welcome are all a big part of being are all interwoven into vulnerable leadership 100%. And I know that I am speaking in a sense of very like, these are all the things that I have learned. These are these pockets. I live in this very joyous, pretty, flowery, planty place. But it's not real for everybody. That's not real for me all the time. Today it is. Today that's where I'm at, but some days it's not there. But creating opportunities for trust or opportunities to trust, I think, are really important, especially when we're talking about culture shift. And providing spaces for people to be able to be willing to be vulnerable. If we're not willing to create opportunities for trust or to trust in our own vulnerability, our own transparency, our organization's vulnerability, our organization's transparency, then we won't get there. So it takes work. And when we're talking about culture shift, that's not just snap of a finger. So, yeah.
That's really important, Britt, that you shared that it's not easy work. Any self-work like this and working with humans, everyone has their different take on things. It's hard. And, we say leadership's a muscle, and, the more you practice, the stronger it gets. Mm-hmm. But it's also, it's for the brave. It's far easier to sit back and do nothing than seek to improve yourself and to improve the culture that we all work in, whether we're at the university, whether we're in a small business, a nonprofit, government agency. I mean, all, wherever you are planted, you need to, you want to do your best and find that happy place that you talk about. And does it mean that every day is going to be a happy place? No, that's not mm-hmm. realistic, but we want to be, it's life is a journey. So it is 1 o'clock and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. This was fabulous. I think everyone, I know I took so much from hearing you. You kind of helped get us all centered for the spring and summer. So thank you for that. It's a joy to be alive. We've gotten through a pandemic, and hey, we've got lots of great things ahead for us. So I did put in the chat that we have opened our application for Leadership Northwest Indiana, which is designed by our academics here at Purdue Northwest, who are leadership experts. Dr. Rachel Clapp-Smith and Dr. Jane Thomas have helped us create a fabulous curriculum. And then we bring leadership practitioners with who can complement. So we have practitioners and academics, and it's just a really rich program, and it's fun. And we have good food. Never always got to mention the food. Food is always a great uniter. So if you're interested, please contact us and we'll help get you through that. We also have the Explorer program. Some of you, I see some of our explorers on here. So thank you for joining us. Again, thank you, Britt, for your sharing your wisdom and your life experience with us. It was just a joy to have you today. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day, and bloom where you are planted.